Here we go. Okay, so my name is Dr. Erika Enos. I'm a naturopathic doctor and I practice in Denver. I have a practice in Cherry Creek now. I moved last year, and my focus is treating people with autoimmunity. I treat all kinds of things and all kinds of conditions because as a naturopath, that's part of what we do by default. That's holistic medicine, but my focus is really in autoimmune conditions. I see a ton of thyroid, autoimmune thyroid because it's so common, but I also see a lot of connective tissue diseases as well. Those are the second most common group of autoimmune conditions I see. So today I decided that I want to talk with you about what I consider to be the 4 pillars of treating autoimmunity. So the areas that I focus on when I'm treating patients. And I'm going to start, though, I don't know how many of you are really familiar with naturopathic doctors, what our training is, and how we approach healing in patients. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that, but the bulk of the time on the 4 pillars. And with 2 of those pillars, I want to go into some practical things that you can do lifestyle and nutrition-wise to help support yourself in healing with that. Okay, and again, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to chime in and ask. So the first thing that I want to talk about is just the qualifications of naturopathic doctors, because I think people can think all kinds of things when you hear naturopath. One is that we've studied some herbal medicine or taken an online course. That could be an assumption that some people have, or some people think we're actually medical doctors, just a little bit of alternative training. But naturopathic doctors, we're our own profession, and we have some overlap in training with medical doctors. So to go to a naturopathic medical school, you need to do pre-med. So we have to have the same background because we are going to be practicing medicine, and not just talking about things like meditation and herbal medicine and eating more greens and things like that. So you see over here a list of some of the coursework that we do in naturopathic school. So pretty similar. All of this is overlap between naturopathic doctors and medical doctors. There are areas where medical doctors focus much more than we do. So for instance, naturopathic doctors learn to do surgery, but we only learn minor surgery. So we learn how to do things like remove moles and take skin biopsies and things like that. In the state of Colorado, that kind of practice is not in our scope here. We have a pretty basic scope of practice, but we have a pretty similar background, which is really nice for our patients because it means that we are versed in pharmaceuticals and conventional physical exams and diagnosis and things like that, which I think is really important. And then you can see over here on the other side that we put a lot of work into this training. So we put a lot of hours into getting our degrees, just like medical doctors do. I went to the school on the far left, the National University of Naturopathic Medicine in Portland, Oregon. So you can see we go to almost 5,000 hours of training over the course of 4 or 5 years to get our degrees. And in Oregon, where I went to school, we're actually licensed as primary care physicians there. So we get to do that for people as well as all of our naturopathic stuff. And again, our scope of practice is smaller in Colorado. We can't prescribe any pharmaceuticals. We're not primary care, but we still have a wonderful scope of practice, and we still get to use all of our cool naturopathic tools that we use. So these are some of our similarities, but we also have some additional training. So in addition to the things that you saw on the previous page, we also learn botanical medicine. So we learn how to use herbs. We learn homeopathy. We do counseling courses. A lot of my patients call our sessions together their therapy sessions as well. We do hydrotherapy, which we'll talk about this a little bit more, but this is the use of water, specifically hot and cold applications to actually stimulate healing in the body. It's a very old naturopathic tradition. We also learn nutrition, and we learn a lot of nutrition. We do, I think, 2.5 years of nutrition coursework, and then we talk about it in a lot of our other specialties. So when you take gynecology and neurology and rheumatology, you learn nutrition in those and how it applies to conditions. And nutrition can mean nutraceuticals or nutrient supplements like the fish oil bottle that I have here, but it can also mean what we eat on a day-to-day basis, which I think is the most important aspect of it. And then we also learn naturopathic physical medicine. This can be a variety of different things, but it includes things like chiropractic type adjustments. We call them naturopathic adjustments so that we don't touch on any legal toes there, but it's essentially the same type of thing. But it can also include some orthopedic medicine as well. So we have a very different toolkit. And some people think that these things, using herbal medicine, using nutrition, using homeopathy, that these are what separates a naturopathic doctor from a medical doctor. But I actually don't think that those are the most important things. I think that the real differences are the things that I've listed on this slide. So one thing is we spend a lot of time with our patients, and we do that because of the next two things, individualization and then holistic assessment and treatment. So I typically spend with my new patients about 2 hours. I used to budget an hour and a half. Now I do 2 hours. And sometimes that's not even enough. Sometimes I have to do their treatment plan later and add some additional time to go over that. And that is because when somebody comes in my door because they have scleroderma and they want support with that, I don't just treat scleroderma. I want to know who that person is. And I want to know, one, how they experience scleroderma. I want to know how the rest of their body is functioning, doing that holistic assessment, because conditions don't happen in a vacuum or in isolation. But I also want to know about that person's history in depth. I want to know not just their medical history, but I want to know their social history and their environmental history, who they are and how they got to where they are today, both literally and metaphorically, because understanding those patterns is going to help me best understand how to treat that individual and help them meet their health goals. And so some of that holistic assessment might just be part of that verbal history, but it might also be physical exams that are based on looking at things like nutritional findings rather than just your standard physical exam as well. We also have a really big toolkit. So as you saw on the previous page, we've got so many different ways of treating a patient and approaching things. And all of those, botanical medicine, homeopathy, physical medicine, hydrotherapy, those all have a lot of subsets. And it's really nice to have that toolkit because certain modalities work better for certain people. And people have different affinities. Some people really like taking herbal medicine, so they really like liquid tinctures or teas, and those work great for them. Other people like homeopathic pellets. Some people want to do as much as they can with diet. So it's nice to be able to meet people with what they like and resonate with the best. But having that big toolkit also allows us, when people don't respond as predicted, we have a lot of different options to try. And it also lets us treat different layers and different levels of illness along the way. So I love having that toolkit. It's really important. But I think the most important thing on this slide is actually the guiding philosophy that we use to approach patients and care. So the first thing on this list is the vital force, which sounds very Star Wars-y. But the concept of the vital force is a naturopathic term that has been around since the late 19th century. And it's basically your body's innate ability to heal. Your body wants to be healthy and it wants to heal, and it has this natural capacity to do that. You can also think of the vital force as that intangible thing that makes us human, that gives us life, right? We are more than cells, we're more than biochemical processes happening in our body, right? We're not just a bag of chemistry that's happening. There's something more that goes into being alive and being human. So there are other forms of alternative or natural medicine that have that concept of the vital force. In Chinese medicine, they call it qi. In Ayurvedic medicine, they call it prana. And those are other ways of saying that we have this life force within us that we need to treat and stimulate to heal when we're dealing with chronic disease. Another thing that I'm doing with patients is I'm often identifying what I call obstacles to cure, so things that might block their body from healing. And you could think of that as something very physical, like if their body has been exposed to lead and they have a heavy metal burden, that could be an obstacle to cure that we need to get out. Or it could simply be a mindset. It could be something like the belief that your body can't get better or can't feel better, things like that. And then we really focus on also giving the body the right information to heal. So that could be making sure that you have the right nutrition for your body's chemistry to work optimally and the immune system to work optimally. But again, the right information to heal could be fostering the belief that you can heal and you can get better. So we're always looking at both the physical and the mental and emotional piece as well. Looking and removing for these obstacles to cure and giving the right information, this is really part of creating a better terrain in the body. So the terrain in the body is essentially the environment. And that's a really big thing that we focus on. Instead of looking just at disease, we want to know the conditions in the body. I think the best way to understand terrain is think about a garden. And so if you were going to assess the terrain in the garden, you'd be looking at things like how vital is the soil? Are there worms in there that are going to be composting and doing all the good things that we need to break down nutrients? Or is the soil depleted of nutrients and dry? You know, is there enough water? Is there enough sunlight? Things like that. And we also have a terrain in our body that needs to be healthy in order to heal. And naturopaths tend to think the terrain is one of the most important things. The other thing that I think is a really important part of naturopathic philosophy, and I think most naturopaths would list the top 4, and I like this last one as well. I think it's really important to always continue to ask the question why when you're treating a patient. I don't have a good Scleroderma analogy for this, so I'm going to use a thyroid analogy to be a little bit easier. But when somebody comes to me and they are having a lot of fatigue and their hair is falling out and they're feeling constipated, we might do lab work and see that they have a low functioning thyroid, which could cause all those symptoms. And a lot of people will stop there and say, okay, let's give a thyroid medication, or let's give this combination of nutrients that treat the thyroid, and we've got our solution. The thyroid was the issue. But for me, I find it really important to then ask, why is the thyroid low functioning? Why is it not functioning as it should be? And that might lead me to another answer. That answer might be the diet doesn't have enough selenium and zinc and iodine in it. And then I might ask, why is the diet that way? Is the diet that way because this person just needs a little bit of education about it? Is it because they're really busy? Is it because they're stress eating the wrong things? And then asking that next question of why? And that helps us treat a person on a deeper, more holistic level. So I consider these to be the real differences, not just using herbs. You can absolutely use an herbal medicine just like you would a pharmaceutical. And even though you're using an herb, it wouldn't be practicing naturopathic medicine. So a good example of that could be if somebody's diabetic in conventional medicine, they might be put on metformin. And a naturopath might choose to use the herb berberine, and that can help lower blood sugar too. But if you only put them on berberine and you're not looking at these other factors, it's not actually naturopathic medicine. It's just using an herb with that. All right, so I'm going to jump into the meat of the presentation here. And that is covering these 4 pillars that I use to guide myself when I'm treating autoimmunity. So those 4 pillars are going to be setting the foundation, what I call foundational habits, immune system balancing, removing the fuel and discovering and treating root causes, and then stimulating the vital force. We're going to spend a little bit more time on the first 2 because I can give you some practical do-at-home things to do with those. And then we'll talk just a tiny bit about the other 2. I also think the reason I want to focus on the foundations and immune system balancing is because especially the foundations are really the most important thing that you do. Foundations are exactly what they sound like. You need foundations for healing from autoimmunity and scleroderma specifically, but you need it for every disease. So honestly, these foundations are something that I do with every patient, regardless of what condition or what complaint they come in with. They are really about creating terrain, really creating a healthy terrain. So taking your garden and making good, healthy soil where things can grow and thrive. As I was putting together this presentation, I really debated if I should put a fifth thing on here. And it's not really a pillar, but it is something that happens in treatment, and that is palliation. And if you're not familiar with the word palliation, which a lot of people aren't, it basically means treating a symptom without trying to alter the underlying disease process. And that can be really necessary when we are addressing chronic conditions, but it's not my favorite thing to do. And quite honestly, when people come to me and they just want a symptom palliated and they have a chronic condition, the naturopathic care often doesn't work that well because you really need to set the foundations for them to be able to work. So for instance, I remember another naturopath that I know who treats kids complaining about a family where the mother would bring the kids in again and again and again wanting antimicrobial herbs when they were sick. And the doctor was finally like, I'm not going to keep doing this. You need to change what they're eating and change the conditions around the house because they're getting sick more often than they should be, and the herbs aren't working that well with it. So those foundations are really important. And palliation is necessary, and it can be really life-saving, and it can also help us kind of tamp down the fire, the symptoms, so that we have the bandwidth to work on these other areas. So it can be really necessary, but we're not going to worry too much about that in this presentation. Okay, so let's go on to foundations. So foundational habits, again, these are things that set the foundation for healing, and they're really important for any and every condition that I treat. And what I find is if you can really establish good foundational habits in people, a lot of times their conditions, many symptoms will resolve just from doing that rather than treating the disease specifically. I went through this period of time in my practice, especially in the beginning, when with the new patient appointments, all I would do would be do these foundational habits, nothing else. And even with just those, you could see some pretty remarkable change. And I really liked to do that both for my own edification to see just how well they worked, but also to stress to my patients how important they are, how much more important that they are than a certain nutraceutical or a certain herb, things like that. The reason that we do this is that this list of things that I'm going to give you next, they really support the proper functioning and balance of every major organ system in your body. So even though Scleroderma can be focused on certain areas, you know, the skin, the collagen being one of the big areas, and then certain inner organs. And maybe that was a bad analogy because it can impact a lot of inner organs, but we don't want to think of what we're doing as just focusing on those areas that Scleroderma impacts. We want to focus on the whole body and get every organ system in the body in balance with that. The foundational habits help us eliminate toxins, they help us absorb nutrients, and they improve movement and flow of things like blood and lymph. And so we need blood to move our immune system, and our lymph to move our hormones and move out toxins and things like that. They do what I call emptying the body bucket. So this is an analogy that I love to use with my patients. I want you to all think of your body as a bucket, which is not very glamorous, but it helps us simplify things. So this bucket, your body bucket, tends to work best. It can thrive and be vital when this bucket is clean and empty for the most part. I like to think of it as I'm a big cook. I love to cook. And if I come home at the end of the day and the kitchen is a mess with dishes from last night and this morning and nothing's put away, I can't easily make a good meal, right? And our body bucket is similar. We have to have things organized and clean to be able to thrive. So we all have a natural spout at the bottom of our body bucket that is made up of our major routes of elimination, which I see actually did not transfer very well onto this. Those major ways of eliminating our body, letting stuff out of this bucket, are going to be our lungs, our kidney, our liver, our digestive tract, and even our emotions, and to some extent our skin. So our skin is a good route of elimination when it's sweating. So what happens with most of us as we go through life is we tend to put a lot of deposits in this bucket. And those deposits could be all the little things that we are exposed to all day long. It could be things like the chlorine in our shower water and the I want to say 80 chemicals that women tend to put on themselves daily, I think is the number right now for care products and the chemicals that we tend to get exposed to. It can be the food that we're eating, it can be stress, it can be things like that, but we can also have bigger deposits that happen in this bucket over time. So that could be things like trauma, could be an emotional deposit in this bucket that we can't quite deal with and get out. It could be exposure again to something like lead, which is a toxic heavy metal, or mercury, or things like that. And because we have so many things in our environment that we need to process through our body bucket, for most of us over time, this bucket fills up and fills up. And many people who don't necessarily have a chronic disease as this fills up, they call the way their body is not working as much, they tend to say it's aging. You know, that's a really common thing for people to say. I kind of have this like internal eye roll when I have 30-year-olds come into my office and they tell me like how stiff they are in the morning and, you know, how their body aches and whatnot, and it must just be aging, which I think those are a little early for 30 years old. So we sometimes don't notice as this bucket is filling up because it happens slowly over time. I think if we went from an empty bucket to flowing over, all of us would notice it in a second. Over time, as this bucket gets full, and it exceeds its capacity, our body has to deal with the toxins in this bucket in some other way. And that's going to be either depositing it somewhere in the body that feels safe, like out of circulation, or it's going to be trying to push it out through another route of elimination. And those other routes of elimination that are less efficient can be your skin. So that could be things like, adult acne or psoriasis can be another one, mystery rashes, things like that, musculoskeletal. So that could be just, I feel too sore after working out, up to arthritis or other connective tissue issues. Mucous membranes could be things like your sinuses, or in women, their vaginal canals. But you can also think of it, our mouths have mucous membranes in our eyes. So when we have changes there, we know the bucket is overflowing. And then we can have mental, emotional changes too. So this could be easy irritability to severe depression to psychiatric disorders here. So you can see that definitely when scleroderma is in play, we're having impact on some of these secondary emunctories, right? Some of these secondary areas. And anytime someone has an autoimmune condition, I tend to think of their bucket as overflowing. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to empty this bucket, and that's going to help with disease symptoms and hopefully with healing the disease as much as possible with that. I just lost something that I wanted to say that I felt like was really important, but maybe I'll come back to that. So this is a major focus to empty out this bucket as we go along. That's what it was. So people can hear the word detox or cleanse, and it sometimes invokes doing things like a juice fast for a week or two out of the year, but that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about emptying this bucket. The foundational habits are really about how do we empty it on a daily basis. Because that's really what keeps us healthy. And if you just do this a couple weeks out of the year, even if you're doing it really intensely, you're never going to get that bucket empty completely. So with the foundational habits, we're really working on the last bullet point here, and that's building health so that we can crowd out disease. So one way to treat chronic disease is trying to focus on the disease and the symptoms itself. But another way to approach it is to create so much health in the body that the disease can't exist. So this is, gosh, I hope some of you are gardeners there, because I'm going to draw on that again. When we talk about organic or sustainable gardening, one of the concepts is building really healthy soil, because when you build healthy soil, you actually don't get the same pests and weeds that you get when you have an unhealthy soil. So we do the same thing with health. So these are a list of some of the foundational habits that I routinely use with patients. Lots of naturopaths use similar foundational habits. We're all going to have a little bit different twists on this. Some people focus on them more than others. I think they're important. So I always give people foundational habits, and I always ask about them at every appointment, how people are doing with them, what we can do to personalize them or troubleshoot them, what we need to keep doing, what we don't. And I learned most of these and the importance of doing them with every patient from a mentor of mine in school, Dick Tom. And the more I'm in practice and even the more research I see coming out about dietary and lifestyle changes, the more I'm just awed that he put these together, 25 years ago to help his patients, because again and again and again, we see how important these are to any kind of condition. So I'm always working with people. Well, I'm going to kind of go through this briefly, and then we're going to focus on one of them. I love doing dietary changes with people. I think that has the biggest impact on that body bucket is changing diet, because the food that we eat is one of the biggest sources of information that we put in our body on an ongoing day-to-day basis. And so therapeutic diets are going to be a combination of what do we take out that is harmful or inflammatory in the body, and what do we put in that is healing and supporting the body and functioning best. And the therapeutic diet that I use most often with autoimmune conditions, although it changes, is an autoimmune paleo diet. So that is focusing on grass-fed meats and vegetables and good fats and fruits, things like that. And then it's building back in other healthy whole foods. So the goal is really discovering both taking out things that are inflammatory for all of us. So a good example of that could be canola oil is inflammatory for all of us. Hydrogenated oils are. So we take out things like that. And then we also take out things that aren't necessarily unhealthy foods, but they can be inflammatory for individuals, especially individuals with autoimmune conditions. So that could be things like nightshade vegetables, like tomatoes or eggs. And there's nothing inherently unhealthy about tomatoes or eggs. In fact, those both have really incredible, awesome nutrients in them. But sometimes they can be inflammatory and cause issues for people with autoimmune conditions. And I think all of those things, those inflammatory things, especially the foods that are inflammatory for all of us, like unhealthy oils, you really want to decrease them, because you want to remember that when you have scleroderma, your body is reacting for the most part to things that should be inside your cells. So most of the main antibodies that are being produced are antibodies to proteins inside your cells. So the idea is those things shouldn't even be visible to your immune system, right? They should be protected by a cell membrane. Your immune system shouldn't be able to react to them. So you're seeing cell damage where those proteins are coming out and being visible to the immune system, and you're having the immune reaction to them. So if you can cut down on cell damage by cutting down on inflammation and things like oxidation, then you can really cut down on the amount of immune reactions that you're having in your body. And again, diet is one of the most important things there. So I do have these kind of cookie cutter diets that I start people on, and then over time we personalize that. So we figure out what diet is what's gonna work for you best and work for you best in the long run, because we want something that's sustainable. I also, and part of the diet is healing nutrients. So I might ask people to increase certain things in your diet, and you're gonna see some things that I like people to increase along the way as we go through this presentation. But this could also be using what we call nutraceuticals or vitamins in the beginning to help replete the body with nutrients. I am always wanting people to make sure that they're hydrating enough and correctly. And most of us know we need to be drinking water, but this is an area where a lot of times just drinking plain water isn't enough. And so this is actually what I'm going to focus on as a foundational habit today, with some different tips on how to hydrate better and smarter. And I'll talk about why that's so important with scleroderma, especially as I go along. Moving the body, of course, being really important. We know that exercise actually decreases some of the inflammatory markers that are associated with autoimmune conditions. So it has a very specific link to decreasing flares of autoimmunity, exercising and moving the body. Then food and sleep hygiene. So these are going to be the habits that we have around eating and sleeping. So often I find that how people eat is just as important as what they're eating, because if you're eating in a way that is not letting you break down nutrients properly, or if you're eating when you're stressed, it's going to create leaky gut, and leaky gut is a condition that is associated with autoimmunity, period. So a lot of autoimmune experts will say that you can't have autoimmunity without leaky gut. So it's really important that we pay attention to how we're eating and not just what we're eating. Sleep hygiene is habits around sleep. You know, that is when our body produces the highest level. What's that? Was there a question? I'm not getting that. It's not coming through very clearly.
I'm not hearing it clearly either, so I would say ignore it.
Okay, I'll ignore it, and hopefully we can have time at the end. Sleep is when we produce the most of a hormone called growth hormone, and growth hormone is one of the keys that our body needs to repair, and it's anti-aging. So we probably all want a little bit more growth hormone in our lives. We also talk about ways to manage and reduce stress. That is so important for healing, because when we're stressed, we're in a fight or flight response, or what we call sympathetic nervous system state. And when we're in that place, our body, again, can't heal. Everything goes haywire. So we need to make sure that we're reacting to stress. So some of that can be what stress that we identify that you can remove. So are there like, toxic habits or toxic people that need to be removed? But also, what kinds of things do you do on a day-to-day basis to help you deal with stress, or reframing how we think about things too? Ooh, sorry, the mouse is a little too reactive for me. Dry skin brushing is a simple thing that I have people do to help move their lymphatic system. So helping to bring, you'll see it actually helps bring fluid into cells, but it also helps move waste out. And definitely with scleroderma, when skin gets tightened, you're going to really have a reduction of lymphatic flow in the body. So this can be a really good thing to do. It's done with a natural fiber brush, and natural fiber brushes can be very soft or they can be very hard. And if your skin is pretty taut, you're probably going to want a softer brush so that you're not doing any damage to the skin. But I think this can be a really important one. My favorite, I'm not going to go into details on how to do that, but if you Google how to do it, I actually really like the instructions from the website Goop. They have a good video that is really simple for that. Home hydrotherapy. So I mentioned that hydrotherapy is the use of water, and water specifically with hot and cold. And that could be cool and warm, different degrees. And I have people use it in ways that stimulate circulation in the body, essentially. So it's really about stimulating your body rather than the actual water or the actual hot and cold with that. So one way that I might use this, I had a scleroderma patient with an ulcer on his leg, and we wanted to bring more circulation into that. So I had him alternate, and he didn't really get radouts in his feet. That wasn't an issue. So I had him alternate between hot foot baths and cold foot baths. And that actually brings circulation down through the leg, and you need that circulation to heal the tissue. So that could be one example. My classic that I have patients do is simply ending their warm shower with a cool rinse too. Castor oil packs are probably the strangest foundational habit that I have people do, but I love them. I think they're really wonderful. Again, I'm not going to go into the details on this particular thing, but this is an abdominal compress that's put on regularly when we're helping the body to heal, and it really helps with the detox process. It helps with healthy gut function, and gut is so important when you're talking about autoimmunity, because your digestive tract has 80% of your immune system in it. So if you don't have a healthy digestive tract, it's very hard to have a healthy, balanced immune system. Castor oil packs also are really supportive of the immune system, because you're putting this warm compress on. That doesn't sound very appealing today, but in the winter, they're awesome to put on at night. It really helps with more restorative sleep and healing in the body. And then one of the other things that I work on a lot with people is how they're breathing. So both where they're breathing in the body, are they breathing up in their lungs or down in their belly? Because we know that how we are breathing, where our breath is coming in, can actually impact the nervous system. So again, if our nervous system is not working well, we can't heal from any condition, from any disease. So that's really important. But I also have different therapeutic breathing techniques that I'll use with people if they're processing trauma or for stress management or things like this. So these are the main foundational habits that I use with people. I might have different habits that I ask people to cultivate based on what I identify in that 2-hour meeting or follow-ups that we have that I think they really need as a day-to-day habit. So for some people that might be spending more time outside in the sunshine. It might be journaling, exercise, something like that. So these are really about what we do on a day-to-day basis or sometimes on a weekly basis to help keep our body balanced and in line. So we're going to focus on hydration specifically, and this might seem really boring, like you already know, have 8 ounces of water a day, but it can be a little more complicated than that. So hydration is important for all of us. There have been lots of studies and observations showing that almost everybody is chronically dehydrated. You can see from these statistics up at the top that newborn babies are about 78% water, but we lose about 20% of that by the time we become adults. And I don't think that is necessarily just aging. That's the wear and tear of environment and not paying attention to what we're putting in our bodies and what's going out of it as much as we should. So newborn babies, of course, come out near perfect, and then they're fed on liquid for the first year. So they're going to be much, much better hydrated than we are. So water is really important for removing waste and toxins. This is going to be on a macro level through urine. And we know that urine is an important process of cleansing, not just the kidneys, but the blood as well. And then on a cellular level, so all of our cells are floating in a fluid called the extracellular fluid or extracellular matrix. And this is this gel-like fluid that's the base of it is water, and it's really important for cellular communication and for healthy cells. So we need that fluid to be able to be revived and refreshed for our cells to be healthy. Because remember earlier I said, really the issue is when cells become unhealthy and they break apart, and then your immune system can react to those proteins inside them, those antigens inside them. Joint health and lubrication. So we know that that is really important when we're talking about flexibility and whatnot. Skin health, we need it just for healing, period. We need it to make saliva, of course. So one of those things that can come along with scleroderma can be Sjogren's and having trouble with fluid production in the body, which is of course caused partially by the immune response, but it's going to be exacerbated by how well you're hydrated too. We also need it, I was just thinking, I guess this could be in part of digestion or part of body's chemicals, but you also need it through your digestive juices. So you need it to make hydrochloric acid, which we often are taught that that's a really bad thing, but it's really important for digestion of proteins and getting minerals and vitamins out of your food. We need it to put out pancreatic enzymes, and pancreatic enzymes are the things that break down your food after you chew, after your mechanical production. They're the chemical that break down your food so that you can get nutrients out of them. If you don't have enough pancreatic enzymes, you're not going to get nutrients out of your food. And it's going to make that leaky gut condition as well. But we also need it for neurotransmitters and hormones. And, again, neurotransmitters, those are going to be things like dopamine and serotonin, and those of course impact how we experience life and feel emotionally on a day-to-day basis, but they also impact our nervous system and through that our body's ability to heal. And then we also need it for producing hormones. And we know that hormonal balance is really key in autoimmunity as well. When we don't have enough progesterone, we can't activate certain things in our immune system. We also need to be hydrated in order to deliver oxygen over the body, and we need oxygen for healing, and we also need oxygen to produce energy. on a cellular level. So one thing that Sandy suggested that I talk about was some ideas around fatigue. And I actually think that proper hydration can be a huge portion of being more energetic throughout the day. Partly because we're getting this cellular energy production when we hydrate properly, but also because we're getting toxins out of our body when we're hydrated. We need it to cushion our bones. There goes my jumpy mouse again. And we also need it to regulate body temperature. So you can see, I hope by looking at this list, that there are lots of things on here that we want to pay special attention to with scleroderma. So some of that being the skin health, the joint health, the production of the saliva, and then the production of chemicals that are really important for having balance with autoimmune conditions. So the question is, I think, are you getting enough water if you're just drinking 8 cups of water a day? So that's often the standard that we hear. Even if you're drinking 8 cups of water, you can still be dehydrated on a cellular level. So we might be drinking it, but our body may not be absorbing it and utilizing it as well as it could be. So what I usually tell people as a starting place for a foundational habit is half your body weight in ounces of hydrating fluids. And I used to say just water, but I've changed that in recent times to be hydrating fluids. I do think that half of that should be filtered water. So an example of this would be a 150-pound person. You would have 75 ounces of hydrating fluid a day. Roughly 32 or 33 of those being water and the rest being other types of hydrating fluids. Usually I tell people not to exceed 100 ounces unless they're doing something, a particular activity or condition where you might need more. I think you could argue in Denver that we probably all need a little bit more than half our body weight in ounces because it's so dry. But if I'm outside doing yard work for hours in the morning, I'm probably going to drink more than 100 ounces. Well, more than my half a body weight in ounces a day with that. Water itself, so this is one of the most important parts, water itself is not that hydrating. So if you think about water that you take out of your tap or water that you take from a filter, maybe you have a filter, that water tends to be pretty flat. It's pretty uneventful to drink, right? It's really different than if you went to a mountain stream and you drank that water. That water is going to feel different in your mouth and it's going to hydrate your water differently. So one of the things I ask my patients to do is give their water more form by putting a pinch of sea salt. So it can be sea salt or Himalayan salt in each glass of water. That sounds kind of awful because when you're trying to quench your thirst, why do you want salty water? But I don't want you to put in so much that it tastes salty. I just want it to feel more rounded in your mouth. So you can do a little experiment with that and get a regular glass of water that you would normally drink and then a glass that you put a pinch of sea salt in and see how it feels differently in your mouth. It should have that rounded feel. The salt also helps with electrolyte balance in the body as well as giving it that rounding, and we get some trace minerals in there. I learned this tip. So the original thing I learned from my mentor was half your body weight in ounces. And when I was a resident, I was sitting in a clinical conference room one day with some students, and one of them was saying how their Chinese medicine doctor had taught them from a Chinese medicine perspective that water wasn't structured enough and wasn't hydrating enough. So I learned this tip of doing the pinch of sea salt from that conversation, and I felt like it made a big difference for me. And so I put this on my list for patients. However, I almost never asked people about whether they were putting a pinch of salt in their water or not. And then in this last year, I picked up a book called Quench that you might want to check out that's about hydration. And it was written by a functional medicine doctor and then an anthropologist who studies cultures that live in deserts and don't have as big water supplies as we do. And this was one of their number one things, was putting that pinch of salt in their water for better hydration. So I thought it was so cool. And they had, lots of different things, different studies and ideas that they cited to back this up. So I was really happy to find that tip. And now I've been asking more people if they have been putting the pinch of salt in their water. And I discovered that about half my patients were remembering to do it and the other half not. If you are a hyper responder to salt, meaning like it makes you swell, then you could do trace minerals and to give it structure instead. But you can also use other hydrating options. So fresh pressed juices. So this isn't orange juice in a box. It's not boxed fruit juices, which tend to be high in sugars and preservatives. This is more like green juices, maybe with some vegetables. Smoothies can be a great way. So again, not like a high sugar Jamba juice, but something that has veggies as well as fruit in it. Herbal teas can be great because herbs often have minerals in them. They all have minerals in them to differing degrees. But also fat is really important to hydration. And this is something that we often skip. And I think fat is so important for hydration in everyone. But again, I think in scleroderma, where we tend to have this dry sclerosing gesture that's exaggerated beyond, beyond what all of us get in this environment, adding fat, having really good healthy fats in the diet and even in how we're hydrating can be really helpful. So that could be things like some patients, if they are really attached to their coffee, I'll have them bulletproof it, which could be putting ghee or MCT oil in. But I tend to think that the caffeine's not the greatest with scleroderma. It kind of is not, great for circulation. But things like Dandy Blend, which is an herbal substitute that is like instant coffee. It works pretty well as a coffee substitute. Or green tea, which has immune balancing properties to it, you can add fat to those too. Also broths and broth-based soups can be really hydrating as well. So hydration is not just about 8 cups of water a day. It's also about how structured these fluids are that we're taking in. One more thing I was going to say that I wanted to not forget about the book Quench. One of the reasons I thought about hydration specifically with all of you was one of the case studies that the functional medicine doctor talked about was the scleroderma case and how much improvement there was simply from increasing hydration and how the hydration was happening. One more thing I'll say on this page, filtered water. Your fridge filters probably are covered with filtering. I really like to see filters that take out chlorine, fluoride. I can't link those directly to scleroderma, but they're very damaging for the thyroid. They really rob the body of iodine. And then pharmaceuticals. So we can actually have pharmaceutical in our water supply because it's recycled so many times when we're drinking city water. So the filters that I really like, the Berkey filter, which is a big countertop one, can be really good. Multi-Pure is another one that you can put, under the sink and have go through your sink, so that makes it really easily. Or you can do a reverse osmosis system, which is what I have. Reverse osmosis is a little bit, I have mixed feelings about it because it wastes a lot of water and you have to add minerals back in if you do it, but those can all be really good. Okay, so can you overhydrate? You actually can overhydrate. That is a thing that happens if you're drinking plain water. So tap water, filtered water, and especially distilled water. A couple times I've had people come into my office that are exclusively drinking distilled water, and that's actually going to pull minerals out of your body and imbalance it, especially if you drink it in large amounts. So if you're overhydrating and you're hydrating in plain water, you can actually overhydrate. It's a little bit hard to do, but you can do it. That can actually cause some big health issues. All right, so the last aspect of this hydration is we want to drive hydration into your cells. So we can drink fluid, we can absorb it through our digestive tract, but it's not always getting into the cells. So a few ways that you can actually get it further into your cells and get that benefit of cellular hydration. So that's going to be the thing that's going to help us with energy production and cleaning out the fluid around our cells. So it's going to be emptying that body bucket and helping you with energy production. One of them actually is dry skin brushing, because when you lightly stimulate your skin with a brush, you're going to help drive some of that fluid in. So that's one of the things. When people dry skin brush, you don't have this sensation of like, oh, my body is detoxing so much through the lymph. You don't feel that, but you can notice big changes in the quality of the skin. And I think that's partly through that hydration that's happening. Massage or self-massage will also drive fluid into the skin. But you can also, another thing that you want to do is you want to activate your fascia. So fascia, some of you may be familiar with fascia. It is a type of connective tissue. It's not one that is necessarily impacted by scleroderma. I think of fascia, it's different from collagen. think of it more as this like gauzy, silky saran wrap that's all over your body. So it surrounds every muscle in your body, every organ, every bone, but it's not just a big silky saran wrap on the outside. It actually does every individual muscle fiber as well. And it's a continuous network. So your fascia goes from your big toe up to your eyeball, literally. So it really connects everything in the body. And the way that you activate it is through stretching and especially twisting type motions. So for some of you, doing things to activate your fascia is going to be easier than others, depending on where your range of motion is. But anything that does twisting, so it's a little awkward if you guys can see my video, but this motion actually does a lot of fascia activation in the hand, so it's in the arm, so it's actually driving hydration in. But it can be as simple as doing things like planting your feet on the ground and sitting in a chair and raising up so that your heels are off the ground. So like a little flexing motion in your feet. So I will often give people a list of little micro movements like these kinds of things that I wanted them to try and remember to do several times throughout the day. And, stretching and working on the motion of especially your small joints is so important in scleroderma. And I hope that if you have any restriction in that area, that you're already, working those, making time to work those a couple times a day. And maybe adding some in on your neck, doing figure eights with your chin, things like that to activate the fascia up in the head. That is really great for picking up energy in the afternoon, having a hydrating beverage, and then doing those fascia activating exercises can be super, super helpful. Okay, so that's going to conclude our foundations with hydration as an example. The next thing, and I'm trying to be mindful of time here, the next thing I want to talk about is immune balancing. So I have the question for you guys. Do you ever want to stimulate the immune system when there's an autoimmune condition? Any ideas about that? You can nod yes or shake your head no. Yeah, okay, so I'm seeing a couple no's. I only see a few people. Okay, so I'm going to propose that there's actually a part of your immune system that you do want to stimulate in autoimmunity. For the most part, you want to be doing balancing, but there's actually an aspect of it that you want to be stimulating too. So we are constantly learning things about the immune system. We know way more than we did 20 years ago, and we know more than we did in 2005, which is when I took immunology. And when I took immunology, we talked mainly about we talked about T cells, which are involved in autoimmunity, and we mainly talked about Th1 and Th2. But something that we've learned a lot more about, we've learned different types of T cells, Th17, which is what's involved in autoimmunity, but we've also learned a lot about something called T regulatory cells. And that's a really important thing for you guys to know about, because that's the part of your immune system that you want to work really well and you want to stimulate. So T regulatory cells, or Tregs, get their name because they regulate your immune system to not do autoimmunity. So they're that anti-autoimmunity T cell. So you want to have more of those for that regulation. Okay, so things that we can do, and I'm going to focus mainly on dietary and mainly on whole foods nutrients for you guys, for things that we can do to increase T regulatory cells and just general immune balance. So it's balancing that we want to do plus T regulatory cells. There are special cases when we would stimulate for other reasons, but definitely not a DIY thing, and closely supervised for that. I'm going to start out with my last bullet point here. One of the brilliant things about those foundational habits, and again, I get to call them brilliant because I didn't make any of them up and I didn't put together the general list of them. One of the brilliant things is that they help with immune balance, and a lot of them help with the production of the T regulatory cells. I think, and I would be really interested in doing a study to back this up, but I would bet that the Hydrotherapy and the castor oil packs increase T regulatory cells. The reason being is that we know that they increase blood cells, white blood cells, and we're pretty sure they increase T cells, but they don't create autoimmunity in the body, or they don't fuel it. Most of the time they help people with autoimmune conditions feel better. So my hunch is that they're fostering T regulatory cells. Okay, but what can we do nutritionally with this? So there are some main nutrients that I like people to focus on: omega-3s, vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D, and then short chain fatty acids, which are kind of a nutrient, kind of not. Omega-3s are super important for immune balancing. They're anti-inflammatory, and they also create really healthy cell membranes. So remember, again, that I said we need to keep our cells really healthy, because when cells become damaged, that gives fuel for autoimmunity. And a major way to do that is create healthy cell membranes through ingesting omega-3s. You can do that through fatty fish. So wild salmon, I'm pretty sure wild salmon is higher than farmed salmon in omega-3s. You know, surprise, surprise, they're eating their native diet rather than something that was not meant for them, as farm salmon are. And then sardines can be a really good cost-effective way to get a food source of omega-3s. You can get some omega-3s through plants like flaxseed and hemp seed and chia, but it's not efficient. Your body would have to eat tons of them to get the amount they need to regulate immunity. So I love cod liver oil, and really specifically cod liver oil is what I love, not omega-3 supplements or other fish oils. I love the cod liver oil, one, because it actually has some vitamin A and some vitamin D in it. It's one of the few food sources of vitamin D. And I really think of it as not a supplement, but a functional food. And I'll tell you that the brand that I like is Carlson's in the liquid form, lemon flavored. Don't get the unflavored, only your dog is gonna wanna eat it. But the lemon flavored is like, it's just a lemon flavored oil, essentially. So it's a little weird to put oil on a teaspoon and take it. But that's what I love. It's really benign, but you should probably run it by your doctor before you start anything new, especially if you're on a medication or anything that could be blood thinning, because omegas thin your blood a little bit too. It's something that I often have people use in place of a baby aspirin for heart health. So those omegas are really important. The next nutrient is vitamin A. Vitamin A is something that Americans don't really have symptoms of frank vitamin A deficiency. I might argue that we've got a lot of infertility, and infertility is something that can happen with not enough vitamin A, but a lot of us aren't getting enough of it. Vitamin A, again, cod liver oil, liver. I'm always trying to get people to eat liver. There are actually some good autoimmune paleo recipes for liver out there, and my trick is I will make pâtés that are autoimmune paleo, and I will freeze them in individual servings, and they are my grab and go for lunch, probably once a week or once every 2 weeks. Grass-fed butter is high in vitamin A, pasture-raised egg yolks. One of the difficult things is when I start out people on a full-on autoimmune paleo diet, you actually don't eat much butter or egg yolks, so that cod liver oil becomes key until we can work those foods back in. One thing that I want you to know if you look up vitamin A online later is that no plant foods contain vitamin A, and this is a huge pet peeve of mine. I've probably told this to most of my patients at some point, and I say it again and again on my Facebook posts and my newsletters that you get no vitamin A from plant foods, because when you look it up online, you're going to see a lot of things like carrots and sweet potatoes and these orange foods. And what those orange foods contain is beta carotene. And beta carotene is what we call a precursor vitamin, so you can make vitamin A from it. But the problem is only a very, very small percentage of that beta carotene can be converted to vitamin A. And then you have to have a really good functioning thyroid, a really healthy gut, and the right genetics to convert it. So it's really important that for immune modulation, you get direct sources of vitamin A. Super important. I would encourage everybody to have at least a couple servings of vitamin A daily. Vitamin E. So vitamin E is one of the major antioxidants in the body. So I did mention that oxidative damage is one way that cells break apart. They become damaged. And then again, we have things spell out and we have things that your immune system can react against. And vitamin E helps protect against that. Vitamin E, something that I should actually explain about vitamin E, vitamin A, and vitamin D is that these are fat-soluble vitamins, meaning that you'll see a lot of the forms that you consume them in already have fat. But if you do supplement for some reason, it's really important that you eat it with fatty food. Otherwise, you simply won't absorb it with that. That's another reason that carrots aren't really a good source, because carrots have no fat in them, so they don't get absorbed into circulation as well. Vitamin E, so vitamin E you can get in sunflower seeds. I would recommend getting sprouted sunflower seeds. So you can get a brand called Go Raw from Costco, actually carries them, and so does Natural Grocers. And the sprouting just makes them better, healthier in your gut, and the nutrients more available. Sunflower butter can be good, almonds, hazelnuts. Palm oil, if you're not familiar with this is like a reddish orange oil that can be used for cooking. It colors your food reddish orange, so you want to, choose what's going to be aesthetically appealing when you go to eat it. But it is the highest source of vitamin A. You do want to make sure that you get, I think it's sustainably harvested is the word for it. There's really big issues with palm oil harvesting in the environment, so we want to be really cautious with that. And then all grass-fed animal products, and I actually didn't realize that until I was putting together this presentation. So I love it when I come across new pieces of information when I'm putting together a talk. So the deal is vitamin E, when plants are exposed, when they do a lot of photosynthesis, so when they're making their food with sunlight and chlorophyll, they actually are stressed. They actually get a lot of oxidative damage themselves. So they contain high contents of vitamin E to protect themselves against that damage. And then when cows or chickens eat that green grass, they're getting a high vitamin E content in them. So when animals are in feedlots and they're not outside eating grass, when they're eating grains, which is what they eat in feedlots, they're actually not getting high vitamin E content. So that's kind of a tip when you're choosing where to spend your food dollars. Animal products, it's actually really important to get them grass-fed and organic and whatnot. You're going to have higher vitamin E, vitamin A, and omegas when you do that. So you can get multivitamin in your ground beef if you buy the right kind. I'm going to skip to vitamin D. I should have moved these around so we can cover all the vitamins at once. Vitamin D, you've probably all heard of this. Hopefully your doctors are checking it regularly because it's so important. Vitamin D it's actually not technically a vitamin. So vitamins get their names for being vital amines, meaning we don't synthesize them ourselves. But vitamin D you actually can. So when cholesterol gets together with sunlight in your skin, you make vitamin D. But most of us, for most of the year, don't spend enough time outside to synthesize our own. So supplementing it can be a really good idea. Vitamin D directly modulates your immune system and it activates T regulatory cells. So vitamin D and progesterone, so coming back to hormones, progesterone come together to activate your vitamin D. So you need good progesterone levels and you need good vitamin D levels. Vitamin D levels, you'll see on labs that anywhere between like 30 and over 100 is considered normal. What I do when I look at people's vitamin D labs these days is I look at something called parathyroid hormone and then calcium levels to determine how much vitamin D that individual should have. And I like to kind of go as high as I possibly can with autoimmune conditions. I dose pretty high with vitamin D. Parathyroid hormone has nothing to do with your thyroid. That's just where it's located in the body. It has to do with vitamin D, calcium, and then vitamin K. And vitamin K is super important to get with your vitamin D. This is a change that I've made in the last few years of always dosing them together. If you don't get vitamin K, your body, and you get lots of D, your body's going to put calcium in places that it shouldn't be. So for the general public, I worry about arteries, but I just have a little bit of a question of whether you could decrease calcium deposits in scleroderma if you balance your vitamin K. I don't know if that's true, but I wonder about it. We don't get a lot of vitamin K in our diet. We get lots of K1 in leafy greens, or at least I hope you're getting lots of K1 because you're eating lots of leafy greens. But K2 comes in pastured egg yolks. You get K2 there. You get it in natto, which is a fermented soybean product from Japan. It's kind of an acquired taste, but it's super high in vitamin K. And you get it in other fermented foods, and you get it in liver too. So those can be really helpful. So these are just some general food things like, oh, I forgot short chain fatty acids. I wanted to make sure I make this point. You can supplement short chain fatty acids. These are essentially fuel for the cells of your digestive tract. So they help they help prevent leaky gut, actually, and keeping your gut healthy. And remember, you've got to have a healthy gut to have your balanced. But we can actually make short chain fatty acids. And what happens with these is if we have healthy bacteria in our colon and we eat a variety of fiber, the bacteria will make the short chain fatty acids. So you don't necessarily need to supplement them. I wouldn't go off and supplement a ton of fiber. When you have scleroderma, you can be at a higher risk for SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So what's happening with this is you get too much bacteria in your small intestine, and that can wreak all kinds of havoc in the digestive tract. Most of the time it's going to look like either diarrhea or constipation or both, and bloating. Most of the time there can be different symptoms of it. The reason you're at higher risk with scleroderma is because the movement of the digestive tract can be impacted, either because of use of proton pump inhibitors, or just what can happen if scleroderma is not controlled with the digestive tract. And if you eat a lot of excess fiber, it's going to make SIBO worse. So that might be a time when I would supplement the short chain fatty acids and work on the bacterial overgrowth itself. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas of things to put in your diet to help modulate your immune system. A lot of times I focus on things to take out of your diet, but putting things in your diet is so much more fun. All right, so those were, I know I'm like getting overtime here, but my next two slides are actually pretty short. Those were my first and second pillars. So laying foundational habits, doing immune balance, and then increasing those T regulatory cells. And a lot of patients just want to do those, but I love it when patients want to dig further into root causes. And I also say this is emptying the bucket more. And you're going to see some overlap in here with things that were listed also on the foundational habits. So one of the things that we need to work on is microbiome balance. And I really should have said gut health here in general. So your microbiome is the bacteria in your gut, and we know that these modulate your immune system. So we have bacteria that can imbalance our immune system and ones that can balance it. So that's really important. And the entire health of the digestive tract, really. I listed under here some different testing that I will do, specialty testing. Some of this your gastroenterologist will do, like the breath testing that I do for bacterial overgrowth, or H. pylori, are things that a gastroenterologist would do. But I also do advanced stool testing. You get to collect your own stool and we send it into a lab. It's not the most fun thing, but it gives us a lot of information and areas that we might need to treat. So it can tell us if you might, for instance, have a parasite that is throwing your immune system out of balance and keeping your gut unhealthy. That's not that common, but it does happen. It's more common that we have bacteria that's out of balance. So either we don't have enough of the good stuff for a number of reasons. We can have that good stuff decreased if we've had a lot of antibiotics. In fact, we know one round of antibiotics, some literature says it alters our gut for a year, and some says it alters it permanently. So antibiotics can do that. Stress can actually decrease the good bacteria too. We might be born with not enough good bacteria because we only get the bacteria that our moms had, is how we get inoculated first. So looking at those things can be really helpful. And it's interesting, you would think that if there was an issue in your gut, you would automatically have a ton of symptoms, but I've actually seen some people with no gut symptoms but an autoimmune condition have some of the messiest looking results on microbiome testing that I've ever seen. So yeast in there, parasites in there, and the way that their body is telling them that it's there and out of balance is through the autoimmune symptoms, not through any kind of issue in their gut. So it's pretty interesting. Toxins, I work with people symptomatically to get these out, but sometimes I'll test for things like heavy metals or chemicals. Endogenous toxins are the toxins that your body produces itself, the waste we produce just living. A good example of this could actually be estrogen. If we don't excrete it correctly, it can become really toxic in the body, and that can be an autoimmune stimulus or fuel. And then we can get dietary toxins. So again, that could be things that are toxic for all of us. Refined sugars, heavily processed things, or if we're sensitive, again, to nightshades, that might be an issue. Hormones, and I really call these an intermediary thing because, again, we might have issues, we might not have enough activation of our T regulatory cells because we don't have enough progesterone, but I want to come back to that naturopathic principle and say, why don't you have enough progesterone? Do you not have enough progesterone because you're eating a food that you're sensitive to? That happens. Do you not have enough minerals and nutrients to make progesterone? Is your nervous system so strung out that you're not making progesterone? So hormones are really, I look at them, but they're kind of an intermediary thing. Poor nutrition and absorption, which I've talked about multiple times over and over. Those can be a root cause that we need to look at. Chronic infections. So again, when we think about infections, we tend to think about things like, I have the flu, I have the cold, things like that. But those are what we call acute infections. We get them and they go away and we feel better. But we can also have infections that linger in the body and mess up the immune system. And those sometimes are things that we need to treat. And I mentioned earlier, there are special cases when I do stimulate other parts of the immune system besides the T regulatory cells, and chronic infections can be part of that. I haven't necessarily seen that a ton in scleroderma. I'm sure that there are cases where that's the issue. I see it a lot in arthritis, so I see it a lot in other connective tissue diseases. I may just not be checking for it enough in scleroderma. Trauma and stress can be a huge part of autoimmune fuel too. So I would say a significant chunk of my patients with autoimmunity have had some type of trauma in their past. And it's not the trauma itself, or no, gonna restate that. It's not trauma in isolation that would create it, it's trauma in conjunction with other things. So it's not just one of these things in this body bucket that creates autoimmunity, it's usually multiple. There are a couple books that I listed here, both by medical doctors. The first one, When the Body Says No. And I think this one also, one of the first case studies in it is scleroderma, if I'm remembering correctly. It's by Gabor Mate, who is an internal medical doctor, and he goes through different cases. When you read it, you might have this little sensation that I had where it's like, we all have things happen in life. This is part of being human, but I think it helps us sometimes recognize the different things, the different chronology of things that have happened in our life to get us where we are today. And then The Body Keeps the Score is another one. The Body Keeps the Score is pretty difficult to read because there are such heart-wrenching stories in it, and that was written by a psychiatrist, and he talks some about autoimmunity in there as well. Oops. Okay, stress response. So this, again, stress is huge in how we respond to it. And one of the ways that I assess this is really assessing a person's temperament, which sounds like their temper. It's not quite that. Naturopathic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, we all have ways of looking at patterns in the body. They're a little bit different, but they overlap. So in Ayurvedic medicine, they have what we call doshas. In Chinese medicine, they look at elements. And in naturopathic medicine, you look at temperament and miasm. And not all naturopaths do, but it's something, a sort of additional special thing that I learned. And when we can balance those patterns in the body, you get better holistic treating for people. And you see those systems all really back each other up. So it's interesting that we have the naturopathic systems, which were developed in Europe and America, so actually Western traditions. And then we have Ayurvedic medicine in India, and then of course Chinese medicine in China, and they all have these similar overlapping ways of assessing and treating people. And then we want to look at predisposition too. And this could be genetics. And I don't really just mean like genes specifically related to scleroderma, because we know that is a very, very small percentage, but more about the genes that control things like detox or how we absorb vitamins, things like that. And we actually, genetics are really interesting because we know that we modulate those genes by our lifestyle and what we're eating. So that comes back to those foundations as well. Okay, so that's another major pillar. And the last pillar, which I'm just going to touch on briefly, brings us back to the concept of the vital force. And the vital force, again, is that body's innate ability to heal. So one of the things that we want to do at some point in treatment is we want to stimulate that. We want to kick your body into healing gear. And so the way naturopaths tend to do this is through something called constitutional hydrotherapy. This is not the same as colonic hydrotherapy. We're not cleaning out your colon. This is hot and cold applications in conjunction with a little bit of stimulation from something called a sine wave along your spinal nerves, which your spinal nerves connect to all your inner organs. And this actually stimulates that healing process in the body. Acupuncture, I don't do acupuncture. Some naturopaths do. It's not part of my scope of practice. Acupuncture can be stimulating of the vital force. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the way it's approached is very cookie cutter symptom based, but when it's done really well, it should be stimulating your body's vital force. And then homeopathy as well can do that, and it's many different forms. Okay. Well, I managed to take up over an hour, and hopefully we have some space for some questions though.